still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salailo Makwidiri. The time is 9:41 Central African time, and we're going to be switching gears now to a very, very important story. We'll be turning now to, I think, to the most part, a story of solidarity, a story of sorrow, and a story of resolve. A coalition of African journalists against genocide, led by renowned Nigerian broadcaster Ireti Bakari Yusuf, have issued a powerful condemnation of what they call, and I think at this point we can all agree, a deliberate targeting of Palestinian journalists by Israeli apartheid forces, genocidal forces in Gaza. There's been over 250 journalists that have been killed since October 2023, marking this the deadliest period for press freedom in the 21st century. These journalists have been the world's eyes and voices amid a media blackout that is currently ongoing in Gaza. Foreign international journalists have been barred from entering Gaza, and it's only Palestinian journalists that have been working hard to try and deliver the truth that would otherwise remain hidden. There's been a lot of statement, but I think I want to touch on this one from the African Journalists Against Genocide statement that I think evoked a lot of parallels to our own African battles against colonialism and apartheid here at home, and also called for sanctions similar to those that were imposed on the apartheid regime here in South Africa. Meanwhile, South African journalists have also taken to the streets in some of our major cities, Cape Town, Johannesburg, to try and honor the fallen and protest the murders that we've been witnessing. There's been vigils and marches organized by groups like Journalists Against Apartheid that drew, I think, very, very powerful imagery and voices echoing our own history of resistance. And joining us now is none other than Atiyyah Khan, a very good friend of Salam Media, and the spokesperson of African Journalists Against Genocide. And she's just going to help us understand just how the African journalistic community is responding to this genocide and targeting of Palestinian journalists, and ultimately what does it mean in a broader human rights and historical context. Atiyyah, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on air, and welcome to Salam Media.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a privilege to always be here, and thank you to Salam Media for being the alternative that we need at this moment. I think it's very important that we shout out the people doing the work constantly, consistently, and you guys are so busy. I can't really ever keep up. So thank you for having me. Yeah.
No, the pleasure's all ours. I think we can kickstart, this conversation with just the general response of African journalists. I think it's one that wasn't as forthcoming as we probably hoped that it would be. But at this current moment, how does African Journalists Against Genocide see their role being in this moment, and why is it so important for African journalists to speak out now?
Absolutely. So I just have to say, I'm definitely not the spokesperson.
Mhm.
I just am a member, and I've been calling for, in many ways, something like this to happen. So Ireti Bakare Yusuf is actually from Nigeria,
Yeah.
a podcaster, broadcast journalist for over 20 years. She's actually the founding member, and I think she was the best person to have started this. I think in some ways, South Africa, due to our history, is still very disconnected from other African journalists. We are just maybe geographically too far, but for
Yeah.
whatever reason, I myself couldn't have put this together. I think I really was so excited when I saw that there was a group like this. I joined with so much enthusiasm, and the first thing that they did, firstly, the idea is to have, for now, there are representative journalists from over 20 countries. The idea is to have people from all over the continent in every medium. Okay. The first thing that was done, it was also very clearly launched with a strategy from Ireti, which was the first mission is to get people to join and record a video condemning the genocide.
Mm.
Within a couple of days, an amazing video was released with journalists from all over the continent sending in video clips talking about how journalism isn't the crime, the killing of journalists is the crime. That is the official line. And she did such an amazing job in getting somebody to edit this video. It was circulated, and what was even more amazing was how much media in the rest of the continent was so quick. There are so many members. There's a member from a Nigerian newspaper called the Daily Struggle, which immediately placed this news about this group of journalists standing up. And I think what's so important about this group that we don't talk about enough is that in South Africa we are so spoiled. Like, we are so spoiled. Like, we don't understand, especially as a younger generation, what it means to be able to say and do pretty much whatever you want, as much as you can. We push the boundaries a lot, whereas there are journalists in Zimbabwe that
Mm,
cannot condemn their own government. We have to understand, at the beginning of this genocide, I did connect with journalists from around the continent. I was told that in places like Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and I think it was Senegal. Protests were banned. Definitely in Zimbabwe, protesting your own government is banned. So can you imagine protesting something else? Um, and we are also talking about regimes where there is no freedom. There's a lot of oppression for people themselves. How can there be standing up against genocide when people are also dealing with their own issues? It's not doesn't mean that they don't. It just means that the timing, it took a while. I must say that for me it took a while, but just in the last week there was like a march in Nairobi. There was a march in Dakar in Senegal. So I think we are becoming stronger as a continent, and I think that people who have endured oppression themselves understand and see oppression. This is nothing to do with religion. This is nothing to do with um, Hamas. This is
mhm,
everything to do with human rights. That's really just the bottom line. So, sorry, I'm in a parking lot.
mm,
So basically, I think that we need to just understand that the importance of this group and every other group that is forming with journalists is, all of us are saying we won't stand for this anymore. We see what is happening. And if those journalists are targets, so are we. What would it be if we were there? What would we do? How would we react? Would we evacuate? Would we get up while starving and go and report the news? I don't think that that's what we would do. I think it takes a very particular brave person to be able to do that. And that's all we've been seeing. Yeah.
mm, mm. And I think you mentioned something that's very, very important. The fact that just how spoiled we are here in South Africa to be able to kind of push the boundary as much as we can when it comes to holding power to accountability. And I'm just thinking, could this formation of African journalists against genocide kind of be an opportunity? I mean, we always talk about the intersectionality of the struggles of Africa and the world with the struggle of the people of Palestine, and trying to make sure that we advocate for everything else while advocating for the rights of the people of Palestine. Could this moment be that to further amplify the rights of African journalists, but using Palestine and further perpetuating the Palestinian narrative within the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We can't look at these things as separate entities. In a similar way as we are still talking about land, and as we are still talking about our own genocide that happened in South Africa to the indigenous people, specifically in the Cape by the Dutch, we can't talk about all of these things separately. We have to try and connect the dots. Another thing I mentioned earlier in another interview I was doing was, when you start doing the research, which is not something I've done myself before, which is try and look at from 1948 onwards, from the time the Israeli state was created, how many journalists have been killed? Do we have that data? How were they killed and what was the excuse used? And you will find in the little bit of digging that I found that the same pattern has been happening. And it was like kind of a big moment for me to be like, oh my goodness, we must, like, for me, it was a blind spot because I've been talking, I've been writing, I've been speaking at protests, but I didn't realize this has been going on for decades. in the sense of targeting, but also in the sense of using the exact same excuse every time about the journalist is a Hamas terrorist, right? And every time there are reliable sources that have research to say there is no evidence that the journalist has done that. So for me, it's very important for us to continue our research, to continue our homework on our own oppression, which we are still dealing with in South Africa. As much as we are free, we are also dealing with various things that we need to change systematically. On the rest of the continent, there is a lot of work that needs to be done for people's own rights. And the fact that there are some people who are enduring really, like undemocratic dictatorship or whatever regimes, and they have the capacity to have the empathy, whether it's a civilian or it's a journalist or it's a health worker. They have the capacity to say we condemn the killing of our brothers and sisters in Palestine. It's amazing because it comes down to humanity. It comes down to the fact that we are all also just people with families. We are people who we're not robots operating in front of screens. We also have feelings and emotions, and and yeah, just real lives as well. So I think this is an opportunity for people in the continent to get together, and I'm very excited. There are many campaigns that Ireti has in mind, and I know she was on Salam Media yesterday in a really
Yeah.
powerful conversation. So I'm happy to be here to represent the group for South Africa. There are, I guess, this is also a call for any media worker who watches this, any journalist or media worker in the continent to join. Um, but it's very important that we stand together so we can take action, and we have to understand that that we are fighting a bias in the Western mainstream media. So it's very important that we are loud and we are together.
No, most importantly, I have two last questions before I let you go. Number one, how do we begin? Especially here on the African continent. I know here in South Africa, it's something that we try and do, which is try and hold media institutions and organizations accountable on how they report and how they respond to this genocide. How do we start moving that conversation to a broader African context? Because I don't think we've been doing enough on that aspect, and I think maybe this is one of the reasons why this organization of journalists has been put up together to try and speak on one voice when it comes to the response of African journalists as a whole, condemning institutions, condemning organizations, like we have done with the rest of the world. I think it almost rolls off the tongue when you talk about Europe and the Middle East and the response, whether it's from governments or media institutions, to this genocide. But in the African context, how do we start moving into that direction? That's my first question. And then the last question is, what are some of the markers or milestones will you be watching for to know that this solidarity organizations, African Journalists Against Genocide, is starting to make an impact?
So just in terms of calling out what we can do on the continent, I think that you have we have so many skills in terms of research, in terms of investigative journalism, in terms of what we can do to uncover and call out. So on every platform, whether it's radio, TV, as I mentioned at the start of this interview, the alternative media, and I'm calling it alternative because it's definitely not the mainstream, but the
Yeah.
alternative media is one of the important voices. Like I always say that in South Africa, it's a pity in a sense that things like Voice of the Cape, Radio 786, Salam Media, Muslim Views have been doing the most accurate reporting. But um, unfortunately, because it's a Muslim, maybe it's Muslim editors or Muslim founders, people might not take it seriously due to the level of Islamophobia we experience. And even though it might be the most legitimate, the most honest work. So at the same time, I think we need to understand, like, when I was in Mozambique, I wanted to buy a newspaper, and then I realized, okay, but this is kind of state controlled, and we need to, there's also alternative media somewhere, whether it's in an email newsletter. But as much as we can on the platforms we have to push together to shift that narrative for everybody, for people on the ground here on the continent, but also for people abroad, and call out, like the expose by Hassan Lorga towards the Sunday Times, the Citizen. That was a piece that went very far because he took the time to call out and to hold accountable a certain type of reporting, and this is what we need to be seeing. And I think we still have very strong journalistic ethics on this continent. I think one of the biggest challenges in running a group about Africa is something I feel personally myself is about the limitations of English, because we know people are speaking French, we know people are speaking their own indigenous languages, and we also know um, uh, there's also a lot of Arabic, and so it's sort of really hard to um, do anything without those translations, so that you don't leave anybody out. You want everybody to be included and felt needed and important. But I know that part of the plan is to organize marches, the next step. And I think this is the thing with any kind of organization that's perhaps not formalized, that might be a WhatsApp group. There has to be a strategy. And the strategy, the next move, is to try and organize marches in various countries by journalists. We have seen the Journalists Against Apartheid do that in South Africa, but I think this is going to be on a more continental level, synchronized, or it's still being figured out. For now, the group is quite fairly new; it's a few weeks old, but it's in response. It's an urgent response. To the crisis we have on hand as media and media workers. So I'm very thankful and excited to be part of this community. I'm very happy to connect with colleagues on the continent, which we let's be honest. I always say, like, especially in a country with growing xenophobia, for me this is like super important. I can't stress the importance of what it means to have solidarity with our own um, fellow Africans in this time as South Africans, who, because of our own history, are just sort of kept apart from the conversation. So yeah.
No, most definitely, Ati. I'm also part of that group, so I'm really, really excited to see, some of the initiatives that we can be a part of and drive this message. I'm going to let you go. I know you have a really busy morning, but yeah, looking forward to chatting to you again. Goodbye.
Shukran. Thank you so much. Salam.
So, bye. That is Atiyyah Khan, journalist, giving us insight on, I think, a really, really, I think, needed organization of African journalists. The group is called African Journalists Against Genocide, and it's a collection of really, really wonderful journalists from the continent, Atiyyah Khan being one of them. And yeah, I think it will send a really strong message of solidarity with the people of Palestine, with the journalists in Palestine, about the thoughts and feelings of African journalists, who many of them, I think Atiyyah mentioned, know what it feels like to an extent, have experienced, the worst of imperialism, the worst of, transgressions against their human rights. So, yeah, I think these formations are needed and are very, very important, especially on a continental scale. But with that being said, we've come to the end of today's show. Really, really appreciate you giving us your time. I'll be back with you again on Monday on Tuesday for my edition of News and Views. Inayat will be with you tomorrow for the Juma edition of the show. But I'm leaving you on a very, very sad note. Yesterday we've learned of the unfortunate passing of one of our colleagues in the media fraternity, Tsidi Madia, from Salam Media, and all of the staff members here. We're really, really distraught and really hurt. She was someone that we've worked with on some occasions. She would come on onto our platform to give really, really amazing insights. And we're going to leave you with one of the interviews, a clip that she was conducting an interview with one of our presenters here on Salam Media, and she spoke so eloquently about the role of journalism in the broader context of Gaza and Palestine, and how important it has been for the journalists in Palestine to give us the information that they've been giving us, even under horrendous circumstances. And she was one of the few journalists here in South Africa who are in mainstream media who were not scared. She was really unequivocal when it comes to her solidarity with the people of Palestine, making sure that the world knows and understands the parallels that Palestine and South Africa share. And it was a very, very rare, kind of individual to have in mainstream media, where it is so largely controlled by the Zionist fraternity, and people are silenced, or people are essentially fired, lose their jobs, and they're blacklisted for just saying the truth, for speaking out. And I think CD was very, very brave, and she was someone that loved the craft, loved South Africa. And it's, I think, a very, very big loss to the South African media fraternity. And from our team here at Salam Media, we send our condolences to her family and to everyone in the media fraternity. We're going to take a quick break. Please don't leave just yet. Stick around. There's going to be that really wonderful interview and clip that Sidi Madia conducted with Salam Media. And wish you all the best. Goodbye.